On a spring morning in 1921, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, there was a neighborhood where Black Americans owned their own banks, published their own newspapers, and lived in homes more prosperous than many white districts nearby. They called it Greenwood, a living symbol of the American dream. But here's the contradiction. In less than 24 hours, that entire community was burned to the ground. Hundreds of people vanished from the historical record, and for nearly a century, most Americans were never taught that it happened at all. This is not a video against America, nor an attempt to judge the past. It's an attempt to understand why a story this large was pushed into silence for generations. So what really happened in Tulsa in 1921? Who was protected and who was erased from the nation's memory? To answer that, we have to return to where it all began, a city that was never supposed to exist. It begins not with fire, not with gunshots, but with a morning. The sun rises over Tulsa, Oklahoma, and light spills onto Greenwood Avenue, a street lined with brick buildings, polished storefront, windows, and the quiet confidence of people who know exactly who they are. A black-owned bank opens its doors. A newspaper press begins to hum. Doctors in press coats walk past barbershops, theaters, cafes. Money changes hands freely here. Not borrowed, not begged for, not granted by permission, but earned, circulated, and reinvested within the same few blocks. This place has a name, Greenwood District, and in 1921, many called it Black Wall Street. Among the men walking these streets is a businessman who once ved with nothing but a suitcase and a plan. He owns property. Now, he signs checks. He funds other black entrepreneurs because no white bank would. A few doors down, a schoolteacher unlocks her classroom, carrying the quiet pride of someone educating children who have been told the world has no place for them. Outside, a young shoeshine boy kneels on the sidewalk, earning coins from men who look like him, men who tip well, because they remember being him. To understand Greenwood, you have to understand how impossible it was. America in the early 20th century is a country governed by segregation, enforced by law and violence. Jim Crow dictates where black Americans can live, work, learn, and walk. Lynchings are not whispered rumors. They are public warnings. Property ownership, access to capital, political power, all of it is designed to remain out of reach. And yet, Greenwood thrives. Not because the system allowed it, but because it grew in the cracks of that system. Black money stayed black. Black professionals served black communities. When white Tulsa refused access, Greenwood built inward instead of upward. By 1921, the district boasts more than 35 blocks of black-owned businesses, hotels, theaters, grocery stores, law offices, churches. Some residents earn more than their white counterparts across town. This success does not go unnoticed. In a nation that preaches opportunity but practices exclusion, Greenwood becomes a contradiction, a living challenge to the story America tells itself. Because if black icons can build this without protection, without loans, without political backing, then the myth collapses. The myth that poverty is personal failure. The myth that inequality is natural. The myth that the system is fair, and systems do not tolerate contradictions for long. Outside Greenwood, resentment grows quietly. White laborers displaced by returning soldiers from World War I veterans trained for a violence, now stripped of purpose. Newspapers eager for sensational headlines. Local authorities who view prosperity through the lens of racial hierarchy. Not justice. Greenwood is not just a neighborhood. It is evidence. Evidence that power can exist outside permission. Evidence that wealth can circulate without white oversight. Evidence that the American dream, if applied honestly, does not belong to one race, alone. And that makes it dangerous, because history shows us something uncomfortable. When a marginalized community rises high enough to threaten the narrative, the response is rarely reform. More often, it is correction, swift, brutal, and disguised as order. At the time, no one in Greenwood wakes up believing their city will soon be erased. Parents send children to school. Business owners plan expansions. Life continues, ordinary and hopeful. But beneath that calm morning, something is already shifting. Fear is organizing. Power is watching. And the city that should not have existed, at least not according to the rules of the time, is about to be tested by forces far larger than itself. If Greenwood truly embodied the American dream, then one question remains, heavy and unavoidable. Why did it have to die? An elevator ride, a few seconds, to strangers sharing a confined space in downtown Tulsa. A young white woman steps into the elevator of the Drex L building. Moments later, a young black man follows. What happens inside that metal box will never be fully known, not because it was carefully erased, but because it was never careful. Why recorded to begin with? There is no photograph, no witness statement that survives without contradiction. Only fragments, only interpretations, only fear filling the silence where facts should have lived. When the doors open, the woman stumbles. Out, she screams, and in a segregated America, a scream is never just a scream. By the afternoon, whispers ripple through Tulsa. A story begins to form, not as truth, but as shape, vague enough to accept projection, sharp enough to provoke outrage. The young black man is accused. The details change with every retelling, but the conclusion remains fixed. Guilt is assumed, not examined. Here is the danger of a society built on hierarchy rather than justice. In Jim Crow America, accusation is not a question, it is a verdict. The legal system does not wait for evidence when race has already decided the outcome. A black man does not need to be proven dangerous. He only needs to be imagined as such, and imagination spreads faster than fact. By evening, the story reaches the presses. An afternoon newspaper runs a headline that does more than report hit frames. It sharpens fear into certainty. It turns a rumor into a rallying cry. In an era where newspapers shape reality rather than reflect it, ink becomes accelerant. Truth hasn't even put on its shoes, and rumor is already holding a gun outside Greenwood. White Tulsa reads the paper not as information, but as permission. Veterans still carrying the violence of World War I, men whose sense of power has been slipping. Men taught that order must be enforced, and that some lives are worth less than others. Meanwhile, inside Greenwood, the mood shifts. Business owners pause mid-transaction. Teachers hear murmurs from parents waiting outside schools. The shoeshine boy from the morning watches. Adults lower their voices and stop smiling. This is not the first rumor Greenwood has endured, but something about this one feels heavier. There, more final. They understand what accusations mean. In America. They understand the pattern. A black man accused, a white crowd assembling, the law looking the other way. So Greenwood does what marginalized communities have always done when the system fails them. They prepare to protect themselves. Not to attack, not to riot, but to survive the night. Across town, the mechanisms of power begin to move, slowly, deliberately, and always in one direction. Police discuss custody, not safety. Officials speak of control, not truth. The system does not ask whether the accusation is real. It asks how to contain the reaction. And reactions are no longer containable. As night approaches, crowds gather. What started as a whisper has found a body. Fear has found a voice. And Tulsa stands at the edge of a moment where restraint could still exist, but history suggests it rarely does. Because when a society teaches its people who to fear, and when institutions reward that fear instead of challenging it, the outcome is not chaos, it is inevitability. No one throws the first match yet. No buildings burn yet. No shots echo yet. But the scream has already done its work. And once a city believes a lie loudly enough, violence no longer feels like a choice. It feels like the next step. The night is coming, and Tulsa is about to prove how deadly a rumor can become when power decides not to stop it. By nightfall, fear no longer moves quietly through Tulsa. It has learned to stand upright. It has learned to organize, and now it has learned to wear a badge outside the courthouse. Men begin to gather. Many are poor white laborers, their jobs already fragile before the war and nearly gone after it. Others are veterans recently returned from Europe, men who survived trenches, machine guns, and gas, only to come home to a country that no longer knows what to do with them. They bring their uniforms with them, or at least the habits those uniforms taught: obedience, violence, and the belief that order must be enforced with force. Among them stands a former soldier, barely 25, his war medals still TUC, kept away in a drawer at home. He was trained to see enemies everywhere, to react first and think later. Tonight, no one tells him to stand down. Instead, he's handed a rifle. In post-war America, guns are not just weapons, they are symbols. Masculinity is measured by readiness to fight. Authority is proven through intimidation. And violence is mistaken for control. Inside the police station, another kind of gathering takes place. The sheriff listens as reports come in, rumors, crowd sizes, speculation dressed up as certainty. He understands the law, he understands Prost, but he also understands the political reality of his position. Protecting a black suspect from a white mob does not earn re-election. Confronting the crowd risks turning them against him, and so, instead of neutral enforcement, he chooses a third path: appeasement. This is where systems reveal themselves. Jim Crow law does not require officers to participate directly in violence. It only requires them to step aside, to frame inaction as caution, to call surrender, keeping the peace. Deputies are deputized from the crowd itself, armed civilians temporarily transformed into agents of the state. Fear is no longer just emotional, it is official. Shiny badges now cover trembling hands. Those polished symbols of authority hide a collective panic. Outside Greenwood, men feel emboldened. The presence of law enforcement does not calm them. It validates them. It tells them their fear is justified, their anger understandable, their violence forgivable before it even happens. Inside Greenwood, the message is received just as clearly. The same people who were promised protection by the Constitution see uniforms aligning themselves elsewhere. Black veterans, men who fought for America overseas, watch officers hand weapons to the very crowds threatening their families. The lesson is unmistakable. Service does not equal citizenship. Sacrifice does not guarantee safety. A father pulls his children away from the windows. A business owner locks a door he paid for himself. A community realizes the law is not coming to save them. This is no longer a T1 accusation. This is about power choosing a side. Historically, this moment is not unique. Across the United States, racial violence has followed the same pattern: rumor, crowd, and then complicity. The state does not always ignite the fire, but it rarely stops it. By allowing armed mobs to act as extensions of authority, the line between order and terror disappears completely, and once the T-line is gone, restraint vanishes with it. The sheriff tells himself he is preventing chaos. The crowd tells itself it is defending justice. Both are wrong. What they are actually doing is repairing the ground. By late evening, Tulsa exists into realities. In one, law and order still pretend to function. In the other, force has replaced fairness entirely. The uniforms have made their choice, not loudly, not officially, but decisively, and when fear is given a badge, when violence is given legitimacy. The question is no longer if blood will be spilled, it is only how much. The crowd begins to move, and what happens next will prove that once the state abandons neutrality, destruction does not need permission. It only needs momentum. The streets change their sound first, not the kind of change you can photograph. The kind you feel in your chest. Doors close faster, voices drop lower, footsteps hurry. In Greenwood, the businessman from the morning locks up his office and counts the day's cash twice, hands steady, eyes not. The teacher gathers her paper, like she's preparing for a storm. The shoeshine boy is told to go home early, and for once, no one explains why. They don't need to. Greenwood has lived long enough inside America to recognize the P at turn ... across town. A father walks his young son away from downtown. He keeps the boy close to close. The child asks questions the father can't answer without breaking something. They pass men with rifle, standing in small clusters talking softly, smiling too easily. The father looks away. He tells himself it's just noise, just pasturing. Just another tense night that will pass by morning. That this night is different because for the first time, Greenwood decides it will not wait to be hunted. News spreads that the young black man, the one accused in the elevator, may be inched. In America, that fear isn't hypothetical. It's historical. It has a rhythm. It starts with an accusation, then a crowd, then a rope. And the law often arrives only to take notes afterward. So, black meant some of them veterans, trained by the same country that refuses to protect them, make a choice that is both ordinary and unthinkable. They arm themselves and head toward the courthouse, not to attack, not to riot, to stand between a mob and a man who hasn't even seen a trial. It's a gesture of citizenship. And in Tulsa, it is read as a threat, because this is how power works in a segregated society. Self-defense, when practiced by the oppressed, becomes insurrection the moment it is seen. A rifle in a black hand is not interpreted as protection. It's interpreted as defiance, and defiance is the one thing a hierarchy cannot tolerate. Outside the courthouse, the crowd swells. The sheriff is there trying to hold a line that was never meant to hold. The veteran from earlier watches the scene with a soldier's eyes, scanning faces, searching for command where none exists. Men shout, men laugh. Men push forward just to feel themselves pushing. Then the black men arrive, dozens of them, walking in tight formation, quiet, controlled, determined. For a heartbeat, Tulsa pauses. This is the hinge of history, one of those moments where a city could still choose restraint, where a single decision could send everyone home. The armed men speak to the sheriff. They offer help. They offer protection. They offer the only thing the law has failed to provide, a barrier between a human life and a hungry crowd. The sheriff refuses, or hesitates, or cannot accept what it would mean to accept it. The men turn to leave, and that's when it happens. A scuffle, a shove, a hand grabbing for a weapon. 1 second, a gunshot cracks the air. No one will ever agree on where it came from. No one will ever prove it cleanly, but it doesn't matter because the city doesn't wait for proof. A second shot, then another, then chaos. The father grabs his son and runs. The boy doesn't understand why his father's voice has turned into a command. Behind them, the courthouse becomes a furnace of shouting and smoke. The veteran raises his rifle, not because he knows who is right, but because the crowd around him has decided it. Already, the sheriff's badge becomes meaningless in the noise. Law dissolves into reflex, In Greenwood, the businessman hears distant gunfire and freezes mid-step. The teacher looks out a window and sees people moving fast for normal life. The shoeshine boy returns home to a mother who is already packing, already praying, already watching the street like she's waiting for the load to break. And outside Greenwood, the story takes its final shape, not a rumor, not a mistake, not an accusation. Now it becomes a rebellion. That word spreads faster than any bullet. Because rebellion is permission, it turns an armed black man into an enemy of the state. It turns self-defense into treason. It turns a mob into a militia. And once that framing takes hold, violence stops feeling criminal and starts feeling patriotic. This is the night America will throw away, not because no one sees what's happening, but because the system has already decided what it wants to call it. And the moment it is named a revolt, Tulsa stops being a city in crisis. It becomes a battlefield. No declaration, no uniforms, no rules. Just two sides forced into existence by fair AR and a government that will soon pretend it has no side at all. The first shots were only the opening fracture. Because what comes next is not a riot, it is a war without a declaration, and it is about to spread from the courthouse to the skies above Greenwood. The gunshot does not end the moment, it multiplies it. What had been shouting turns into movement. What had been movement turns into instinct. Men stop listening for commands and start listening to fear. Someone runs, someone falls. Someone fires again, not because they know why, but because everyone else is doing the same. This is how a night slips out of history and into myth. The black men who came to protect one life now realize they are targets, not individual symbols. Their presence is no longer debated, it is framed. The word riot spreads through the crowd, like a spark finding dry grass. And once that word exists, it rewrites everything that follows. Across the street, the veteran raises his rifle. He doesn't aim at a person, he aims at a shape, at movement, at the idea of threat he has been trained to recognize. This is familiar to him, too familiar. The chaos feels like the trenches. At this time the enemy speaks his language, walks his streets, shares his country, and that makes it easier. In Greenwood, the businessman steps outside his building and listens. The sound is unmistakable now. Sustained gunfire, not scattered, not accidental, organized enough to terrify. He thinks of the deed papers locked in his safe, of the loans he extended, of the future he planned to build block by block. None of it feels real anymore. The teacher gathers her neighbors inside the schoolhouse, telling the children stories she invents on the spotter. Neithing to drown out the sound, the shoeshine boy presses his hands over his ears, but the noise slips through anyway. It always does. Outside Greenwood, the narrative hardens. White men begin to move toward the district in clusters, not as a mob anymore, but as something closer to a unit. They talk about restoring order, about putting things back the way they were, about stopping an uprising before it spreads. No one stops them. No one questions the framing. No one asks why the only people being contained live on one side of town. This is the moment the street 8 disappears, not officially, not dramatically, but practically. Police retreat from confrontation. Deputized civilians take their place. Guardrails vanish. The law does not collapse. It recedes, and in that absence, violence learns it can act without consequence. Historically, this pattern is familiar. When authorities fail to protect targeted communities, those communities are later blamed for protecting themselves. The act of survival is reframed as provocation, and once that reframing is accepted, escalation becomes not just likely but logical. Shots echo closer now, windows sure. Someone screams a name, someone else screams. Nothing at all. The father and his son duck into an alley. The boy asks if they're going to die. The father lies not to deceive him, but to give him something solid to hold on to. Lies are often the last shelter adults can offer children in moments like this. The veteran feels the adrenaline surge. He cannot tell who fired first anymore. He only knows who is firing now. Around him, men shout directions that mean nothing. Someone laughs. Someone is crying. Someone fires into the dark because the dark feels like an enemy. And above it all, the city fractures. Greenwood is no longer a neighborhood. It is a position, a front line. By midnight, the story Tulsa will tell itself the next day has already been written. An armed black uprising forced the city to respond. That sentence will appear in papers. It will be repeated by officials. It will outlive the people it condemns. But on this night, inside Greenwood, no one is rebelling. They are bracing for a force that now has a name, a justification and momentum. Bracing for the realization that this is no longer about one man in an elevator or even one gunshot outside a courthouse. This is about who is allowed to exist without permission. And as the crowds push closer to Greenwood's edge, something else becomes clear. Something far more dangerous than rumor or fear. The violence is no longer spontaneous. It is directional. And once violence knows where it's going, it doesn't stop at the streets. It looks upward. By the time midnight passes, the night no longer belongs to anyone. It moves on its own. What began as clusters becomes waves. What felt like panic settles into something called a purpose. Men stop asking what's happening and start deciding what must be done. Greenwood is no longer just nearby. It is now the destination. The businessman watches from behind a darkened window. W's figures move at the edge of the district. They don't rush, they advance slowly, confidently, like people who expect no resistance from the law. He recognizes that posture. It's the posture of men who know they will not be punished. The teacher hears glass shatter somewhere down the street. Not close enough to see, close enough to imagine. She pulls the children farther from the doors, lowering her voice even as the noise outside grows louder. She keeps speaking not because the words matter, but because silence would let the fear in. The shoeshine boy presses Olga into his mother's side. He has stopped crying. Crying feels useless now. Outside Greenwood, the veteran marches with others like him. No formation, no command, but a shared direction. He tells himself this is about restoring order, about stopping something before it spreads. He does not tell himself the truth that this feels like permission to release something he never brought home from the war. This is how crowds turn into forces. Someone sets the first building on fire. No one agrees later on who it was. The record will blur. Witnesses will contradict each other, but the effect is immediate. Flames climb into the night sky, bright enough to be seen from miles away. The fire does not just burn wood and brick. It burns hesitation. Once something is burning, restraint feels absurd. Gunfire intensifies. Not aimed, not precise, just loud. Just constant. A signal more than an attack. Windows explode outward. Doors splinter inward. Greenwood streets, once orderly, proud, fill with smoke, shouting, running feet. And still, the law does nothing. Police do not form lines. They do not push back the crowd. Some watch, some leave, some assist. By arresting black residents, not attackers, but survivors, men are marched away from their homes, while those homes burn behind them. Order is being restored, just not the kind Greenwood needs. This is not chaos. It is asymmetry. Historically, this is how racial violence survives scrutiny. One side is described as emotional, dangerous, excessive. The other is framed as corrective, necessary, reluctant. The imbalance is written into the story before the story even ends. The father and his son make it home, only to find the night has followed them. Smoke creeps through the streets. The boy asks if the fire will stop. The father doesn't answer. He's listening to footsteps, to shouting, to the unmistakable sound of things being taken. Inside Greenwood, the businessman opens his safe, not to save money, but to take out documents, proof of ownership, proof of existence. He wraps them in cloth and hides them beneath the floorboards. It is an instinct older than paperwork. When history turns violent, paper becomes fragile. The teacher smells smoke now, close to close. She realizes that staying is no longer protection. It is risk. She begins to move the children out through the back, one by one, praying the darkness will hide them. Above it all, the city's silence is deafening. No governor's order, no federal intervention, no call for restraint loud enough to matter. America is not asleep, it is looking away. And in that absence, Greenwood is redefined not as a neighborhood under attack, but as a problem being solved. The violence gains language, justification, direction. What remains now is not a question of whether the destruction will continue. It is how far it will be allowed to go. Because when a city watches itself burn and does nothing, the fire doesn't ask permission anymore. It spreads, and before dawn breaks, Greenwood will learn that the night was only the beginning, and that the next phase of this violence will come, not just from the streets, but from above. Just before dawn, when the sky should have meant relief, Greenwood looks up and finds something worse than night. At first it's only a unthin, distant, almost harmless, a buzzing that doesn't belong to birds or morning wind. The woman who has been running 4 hours, hair singed, dress torn, lungs full of smoke, stops in the middle of the street and tilts her face toward the pale blue forming above the rooftops. She expects sunlight. Instead, she sees wings, small planes, private aircraft, circling low over Greenwood like they own the air the way the mob already owns the streets. In another America, flight is progress, freedom, human beings daring to rise above the old limits. But here, the symbol flips on its head. Freedom is falling, and it falls as fire. People later argue about the details because that's what nations do when a truth is too ugly to hold with clean hands. But what's hard to dispute is the presence of airplanes over Greenwood during the attack. Multiple accounts describe them flying low, and official historical work has noted eyewitness reports of shots fired and items dropped from above. What remains debated is how much damage they caused, and that debate in itself tells you something about how quickly reality can be contested when the victims are already being erased. History +2. The text message +2. The woman hears the engine grow louder, then fade, then return. The pattern feels deliberate, like hunting. She runs again past a storefront that was a theater last week, past a home that held a family last night. Now they are frames. Now they are smoke. Now they are ash. And somewhere above her, a pilot banks the plane. We rarely talk about him because he is not the kind of villain history likes. He's not a masked stranger. He's not a foreign invader. He's American. He flies an American aircraft over an American neighborhood and walks away without prosecution. That's the part that should freeze you, because aerial attack isn't just violence. It's domination. It's saying, you don't even control the sky above you, our own home. And the system, once again, doesn't rush to punish it. It absorbs it. It normalizes it. It lets it fade into conflicting accounts and uncertain details, while Greenwood burns in certainty of lived experience. This is what makes Part 5 different from the chapters before it. A riot, however brutal, still implies disorder. But planes introduce strategy. They introduce reach. They introduce the feeling that there is nowhere to hide below. The sheriff's authority has already dissolved into the larger logic of the city. Protect the crowd, restrain the survivors. The mechanisms that should stop violence instead redirect it. And when that happens, destruction becomes efficient. Greenwood is not simply being attacked now. It is being cleared. block by block, building B. Why building? Not just to punish, but to remove, to make the contradiction vanish. The district that should not have existed is being corrected not by law and not by truth, but by a kind of sanctioned chaos that doesn't need paperwork to function. The woman stumbles past bodies she cannot stop for. She sees people forced out of their homes at gunpoint. She sees fires jumping from row of two roof like they've learned where to land. And when she looks up again, the plane is still there circling, watching, returning. The sky, once a promise, has become an instrument, and when the sun finally breaks through the smoke, it doesn't feel like morning. It feels like aftermath. Because what happens after the air turns against you, it's not just trauma. It's accounting, it's numbers, it's records, it's who gets counted, who gets buried, who gets written down, and who simply disappears. By the time the planes turn back for another pass, Greenwood understands summit, in that no law book ever taught them. This is not a riot anymore. This is not even revenge. This is removal. The woman runs until her legs give out. She falls near what used to be a grocery store, her hands sinking into warm ash. The air tastes like metal and oil. Smoke blots out the sun, and for a moment, the world looks like it's ending, not because of chaos, but because of coordination. Above her, the aircraft moves with intention. It doesn't hover randomly. It circles, it surveys, it returns whatever falls from it, whether bullets, burning material, or simp. Letera does the same job. It drives people out. It breaks the will to stay. It tells an entire neighborhood that the ground beneath their feet is no longer theirs. This is what makes aerial violence different. On the ground, you can hide behind walls. In the air, there are no corners. And the symbolism matters. For decades, Americans have been taught to look up and see possibility. It means innovation, courage, progress. But on this morning in Tulsa, the sky delivers only destruction. Freedom does not rise, it descends. And it descends selectively. Below, armed, men continue their advance with a new confidence. Fires are no longer isolated incidents. They are part of a pattern. Homes burn next to businesses. Churches next to schools. Greenwood is not being punished for one alleged crime. It is being erased. As a concept, the businessman never makes it back to his office. The street he helped build is unrecognizable, rooflines gone, brick cracked, ledgers turned to smoke, years of contracts, loans, and ownership dissolve in minutes. This is not just loss of property, it is loss of proof. Without paper, the future will be easy to deny. The teacher leads the children through alleys and back yards, avoiding open streets. She keeps counting them under her breath, not because she thinks she forgets, but because numbers feel like control in a moment where everything else has slipped away. Some don't make it. Bodies begin to appear in places no one will officially acknowledge later. In yards, in basements, along the edges of row or dis. Some are covered quickly, some are moved, some are never recorded at all. The violence has outpaced documentation. And this, too, is part of the system. When destruction happens faster on paperwork, truth becomes optional. The pilot lands his plane somewhere outside Greenwood. There is no arrest waiting for him. No investigation, no courtroom. The law, which has followed black survivors closely all night, suddenly loses interest in men who attacked from above. That silence is not accidental, because acknowledging what happened in the sky would mean admitting that the violence crossed a line even America pretends not to cross. It would mean admitting that citizens were attacked not just by neighbors, but by means usually reserved for war. So, the record stays vague, the language stays careful, and the accountability never comes. By mid-morning, Greenwood is unrecognizable. What once stood as a self-sustaining black city is now a landscape of ruin. Smoke drifts where laughter used to live. Ash covers streets that once carried pride. This is no longer about survival. It is about aftermath. About who will be allowed to rebuild, about who will be allowed to remember, and about how many lives can disappear before a nation decides they matter. Because when violence reaches the sky and still goes unanswered, the message is unmistakable. This was not an accident. This was not excess. This was not loss of control. This was permission. And once permission is given, the final phase of this story begins, not with flames, but with silence. When the flames finally lose their hunger, Greenwood does not find peace. It finds quiet. Not the gentle quiet of recovery, but the heavy silence that follows. Something unspeakable. Smoke thins, embers cool, morning settles over the ruins like an indifferent witness. What remains standing, accidental. What is gone, intentional. The woman who survived. The night walks back through streets she no longer recognizes. She steps carefully, not because the ground is fragile, but because she is. Everywhere she looks, there are signs of interruption. Half-burned letters, cracked photographs, shoes without owners. The neighborhood is intact enough to prove it once existed, and destroyed enough to make rebuilding feel impossible. This is what our air violence changes shape again. Because once the fire stops, the story moves from action to accounting. Officials arrive with notebooks and clipped voices. They speak in the language of procedure, damage estimates, curfews, temporary detention. They do not speak in the language of grief. Black survivors are rounded up and escorted to holding areas for their own protection. Names are written down quickly, incorrectly, or not at all. The system that failed to stop the attack now moves efficiently to manage its aftermath. The businessman is nowhere to be found. His office is ash. His papers are gone. Without records, ownership becomes a rumor. And rumors, as Greenwood has learned, are easily dismissed. The teacher searches for the children she lost. In the chaos, moving from shelter to shelter, calling names that echo back unanswered. The shoeshine boy sits on a curb with his mother, staring at a block that no longer exists, trying to remember where home used to begin. Bodies are discovered and then disappear again. Some are buried hastily. Some are moved under cover of authority. Some are never logged. Death, like property, why, becomes a matter of classification. If a body is not counted, it does not complicate the narrative. If a name is not recorded, it cannot demand justice later. This is how mass violence survives history, not by denying it outright, but by shrinking it, reducing it, turning lives into estimates. Officials announce numbers that feel clean, manageable, survivable. Survivors whisper numb, bears that feel impossible. Between those two versions lies a gap large enough to swallow a generation. And into that gap, the truth quietly falls. The pilot's role is never revisited. The sky remains unindicted. The idea that aircraft were used against a civilian neighborhood becomes uncomfortable, then inconvenient, then optional. What cannot be prosecuted becomes debatable. What becomes debatable becomes forgettable. Greenwood's destruction is reframed as a tragedy without authors. Insurance companies deny claims, citing technicalities that would make a lawyer pee. Rowd and a widow despair. Policies are voided. Losses are individualized, not recognized as collective harm. The very mechanisms designed to restore stability now ensure permanent imbalance. This is not negligence. It is design. Because rebuilding requires acknowledgement, and acknowledgement requires blame. And blame would lead somewhere the city does not want to go. So Greenwood is allowed to grieve but not to recover, to remember but not to be compensated, to exist but smaller, poorer, quieter. The woman watches officials step over debris as if it were natural terrain. She realizes something, then not all at once, but clearly enough to hurt. The fire was only the first erasure. What comes next will be slower, colder, and far more permanent. Erasure by paperwork, by policy, by silence. The city begins to move on. Shops reopen elsewhere. Streets are cleaned. Tulsa learns how to speak about the massacre without naming it. Years pass, decades follow. Greenwood Beck, arms a footnote when it is mentioned at all. And that is the final transformation. Violence becomes history. History becomes omission. Omission becomes national memory. As the survivors age, their stories are treated like echoes to challenge the official account. The ruins are rebuilt selectively. The land changes hands. What was once a symbol of black prosperity becomes a lesso, and no one is eager to teach. But the bodies counted or not do not disappear from the ground so easily. They wait. And in the next chapter, we confront what happens when a nation decides which dead deserve remembrance and which ones can be quietly buried beneath progress because the fire ended Greenwood's night. But the silence that followed would last nearly a century. Long after the fires die out, Greenwood is still not finished burning. Because some damage doesn't glow, it settles. Years later, an elder Lehman stands at the edge of a field that does not look like a cemetery. There are no headstones, no names carved into stone, just grass, uneven and quiet. He leans on a cane now. His memory moves slower than it used to, but this place, he remembers perfectly. He was a boy when Greenwood burned. He remembers the smell before he remembers the sound. He remembers his mother pulling him close. He remembers stepping over something soft on the ground and realizing, much later, what it had been. No one ever told him where the bodies went. They simply stopped being discussed. This is where the story slows down, because counting the dead is never just arithmetic, it's authority. Official records after Tulsa list a number that feels strangely tidy, low, contained, survivable. But survivors tell a different story, one filled with missing neighbors, unclaimed bodies, funerals that never happened. Stories of trucks moving through the night, of hurried burials, of mass graves whisper about but never confirmed for decades. A child who lost her entire family grows up without photographs, without dates, without graves to visit. She carries names in her head like fragile heirlooms. When she asks questions, she's told to move on, to be grateful she survived, to stop reopening wounds that the city has decided to bandage over. This is how trauma is managed in America, not healed, contained. The system steps in again, quieter this time. Death certificates are incomplete. Causes of death are vague. Some records disappear entirely. If a body isn't officially identified, it doesn't demand accountability. If a death isn't counted, it doesn't change the narrative. And the narrative is everything. Mass graves are inconvenient facts. They suggest scale, intention. They suggest that what happened wasn't a riot or a tragedy, but something closer to a massacre. And massacres require reckoning, so the ground stays unmarked. No headstones, the survivors say, only forbidden's memory. This erasure isn't accidental. It's cultural, it's legal, it's political. In early 20th then, Tory America, Black Death rarely triggers investigation. The justice system is not designed to ask how many died, it is designed to ask whether the deaths disrupt order. Once Greenwood is quiet again, order is restored, and that to the state is enough. The elderly man eventually stops coming to the field. It hurts too much to stand where answers should be. He learns what many survivors learn. Memory is safer when carried alone. Speaking invites dismissal. Silence, at least, is respected, but silence has consequences. Without graves, there is no pilgrimage. Without records, there is no lawsuit. Without numbers, there is no urgency. Tulsa becomes a place where hundreds may have died, but officially, not enough to matter. And history absorbs that version gladly. Schools don't teach what can be footnoted. Textbooks avoid what lacks documentation. A century passes. The children of Greenwood's survivors grow old themselves. carrying stories that feel increasingly fragile in a world that demands proof. Then, slowly, the ground begins to answer back. Decades later, researchers, activists, and descendants push for excavations. Radar scans reveal anomalous shapes beneath the soil where shape S should not be. The city hesitates. Permission is debated. Funding stalls. Even the act of searching becomes controversial, because digging up bodies is not just archaeology. It's accusation. It asks a dangerous question. Who decided these lives didn't deserve names? And that question doesn't stop at Tulsa. It spreads outward into how America remembers slavery, segregation, lynching, displacement, into who gets monuments and who gets footnotes, into which deaths are grieved publicly and which ones are quietly absorbed into the landscape. The elderly man does not live to see the first confirmed mass grave, but the child who lost her family does. She stands behind a rope as workers carefully uncover what the city once buried. She doesn't cry. She feels something older than grief, recognition, not justice, not closure, but proof that she was never imagining it. And yet, even now, the numbers are debated, the records incomplete, the answers partial, which raises the question this chapter cannot avoid. If history is written by those with the power to record it, what happens to the dead who were never allowed to be counted? By the time Greenwood's survivors understand that the violence is over, another realization arrives, quieter, colder, and far more enduring. What follows is not chaos, it is administration. The elderly survivor watches men in suits walk the ruins with clipboards. They step carefully, not out of respect, but out of efficiency. They may sue. Ray damaged the way accountants measure. Loss numbers detached from faces, totals disconnected from lives. This is where the massacre changes form once again. Fire becomes paperwork, gunshots become clauses, insurance companies move first, policies that once promised protection suddenly discover exceptions. Fine print blooms where certainty used to be. Claims are denied not because the deathstruck tie-in didn't happen, but because it happened the wrong way. Riots are excluded. Civil unrest voids responsibility. Greenwood's losses, though total, are rendered technically invalid. The language is precise, and precision is power. A man who lost his business is told his policy does not cover acts of violence. A woman whose home burned is informed that riots are uninsurable events. No one argues that Greenwood wasn't destroyed. They simply argue that no one is obligated to repair it. This is not negligence, it is coordination. Next comes the law. Despite the scale of devastation, prosecutions never arrive. No pilot is charged. No official is held accountable. No member of the mob faces consequences proportionate to the harm done. The justice system, weak, age moved quickly to arrest black survivors during the violence, now moves not at all. Cases stall. Evidence is deemed insufficient. Witnesses are dismissed as unreliable. The absence of records cited by earlier erasure becomes justification for inaction, and so the massacre exists in a legal vacuum, too large to deny, too inconvenient to pursue. This is how impunity is built, not th rough denial, but through exhaustion. Years pass. The survivors grow older. Greenwood remains poor. Land once owned by black families changes hands quietly. Zoning laws shift. Redevelopment favors outsiders. What could not be taken by fires, absorbed by policy. And then comes the final layer, education. Children grow up in Tulsa and across America learning history that skips from slavery to civil rights with barely a pause in between. Greenwood is not mentioned, not because it lacks significance, but because significance demands responsibility. Textbooks avoid what school boards consider controversial. Teachers are given no material. Silence becomes standardized. A generation passes without ever hearing the word Greenwood. The child who lost her family becomes a grandmother whose grandchildren ask why she flinches at certain sounds, why she distrusts official promises, why she insists on keeping documents safe. She tells them stories at home because that's the only place they will be told. This is the true cost of silence as policy. It does not just erase the past. It shapes behavior in the present. Without compensation, wealth never recovers. Without justice, trust never rebuilds. Without acknowledgement, trauma is passed down as instinct. Greenwood's destruction becomes a case study not only in racial violence, but in how systems protect themselves from accountability. Silence, in this context, is not the absence of sound, it is a strategy. A strategy that transforms crime into tragedy, tragedy into misfortune, misfortune into memory quiet, disputed, optional. And it works precisely because it feels boring. Paperwork is less dramatic than fire. Policy is less shocking than planes, but policy lasts longer. It shapes decades instead of days. By the time Tulsa begins to publicly acknowledge the massacre, nearly a century later, the damage has already compounded. Apologies arrive without restitute. Iron memorials appear where businesses once stood. The city remembers carefully, selectively, and very late. Which raises a question that cannot be avoided anymore. If silence was enforced deliberately, if forgetting was rewarded systematically, then Greenwood wasn't just destroyed by violence. It was erased by design. And in the next chapter, we follow that day, ign forward into the lives of children and grandchildren who inherited not only loss, but the long shadow of policies meant to make that loss permanent. Because once silence becomes official, breaking it means an act of resistance. The children of Greenwood did not grow up among flames. They grew up among absences. A granddaughter opens a drawer in her grandmother's home and finds documents wrapped in cloth-yellowed deeds, brittle letters, insurance papers that never paid out. She doesn't fully understand what she's holding, only that these papers were treated like something sacred, something that had to survive, even if the people who owned them did not. She was not alive in 1921, but 1921 has never stopped living in her. This is how trauma moves through time, not as memory, but as inheritance. The elderly survivor from earlier chapters grows old watching his children and grandchildren build lives on ground that was never allowed to stabilize. He sees talent without capital, ambition without protection, hard work without the safety net that property, savings, and credit are supposed to provide. Greenwood once said those things. Its descendants do not. That difference is not cultural. It is structural. When Greenwood burned, wealth didn't just disappear, it transferred. Property deeds became void. Businesses were never rebuilt at scale. Insurance payouts never arrived. And without compensation, families were forced to restart with nothing while the rest of the city moved forward. This is the quiet math of inequality. Assets skipped a generation, then another, then hardened into poverty. The granddaughter notices it in small ways first. Her grandmother never trusted banks, never spoke about loans, without tension in her voice. Documents were guarded like children. Ownership felt temporary, fragile, always one decision away from being taken again. You don't need to see a massacre, her grandmother once said, to live inside its consequences. Sociologists later put numbers to what families already knew. Communities destroyed by racial violence show long-term economic decline across generations. Wealth gaps widen not because effort disappears, but because starting points are erased. Greenwood's destruction becomes a case study, one of the clearest examples of how mass violence can shape economic outcomes a century later. But for the children, it doesn't feel like a case study. It feels like limits on where they live, on which schools they attend, on how often they're told to start small. They inherit caution instead of confidence, stories instead of savings, pride mixed with warning. Greenwood is never framed as failure inside the family, it's framed as proof that success can be dangerous when the system decides you don't deserve it. The granddaughter grows up during a time when America begins talking more openly about race, inequality, and history. She hears people argue that the past is past, that everyone should just move on. She wonders how you move on from something that never ended. Because Greenwood didn't just burn in one night, it burned forward. Zoning laws later carve highways through black neighborhoods. Urban renewal displaces families again. Each policy feels separate, technical, defensible, but to those who carry Greenwood's legacy, the pattern feels familiar. Loss disguised as progress, displacement rebranded as development. This is what it means to inherit ashes, not to mourn a single event, but to live with its ripple effects disguised as normal life. The elderly survivor passes away without seeing Greenwood fully restored. His granddaughter attends immemorial years later, standing beside people who share fragments of the same story. She listens as officials speak about healing and remembrance. She appreciates the words, but she knows words cannot replace what compounded loss took away. Still, something has changed. The story is no longer confined to kitchens and drawers. Greenwood is spoken aloud. It enters classrooms, documentaries, public debates. The inheritance shifts from silence to voice. And that shift matters. Because once the children of Greenwood begin to speak publicly about what they inherited, not just emotionally, but economically, structurally, the conversation expands beyond Tulsa. It becomes about America. About how many communities live with invisible debts created by visible violence. About how the past structures the present, whether it's acknowledged or not. Which leads us to the question this chapter leaves hanging. If the children are still paying the price, if the consequences are still unfolding, then what does accountability look like? Not in memory, but in action. It begins with a microphone, a folding table, a city seal on the wall behind it, and a room filled with people who have waited most of their lives for this moment. A government official clears his throat and reads from prepared remarks. The words are careful, respectful, long overdue. He acknowledges past wrongs. He speaks of trace, agony, loss, and healing. Cameras click, pens move. The nation, at last, appears to be listening. For the descendants of Greenwood, this is what remembrance looks like. Not fire, not silence. Boo. T procedure. Nearby, a community activist watches closely. She has spent years pushing for this hearing, organizing meetings, collecting testimonies, persuading officials that Greenwood is not ancient history but unfinished business. She knows how hard it was to get this far. She also knows how easy it will be for it to stop here, because acknowledgement is not the same as accountability. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, official investigations finally begin. A state commission gathers evidence, interviews survivors, reviews archives long ignored. Their findings confirm what families always knew: the violence was massive, organized, and enabled. Greenwood was destroyed not by chance, but by systems that failed or refused to intervene. The truth is finally written down, and then it stalls. The report recommends reparations, compensation, direct action. But recommendations are not obligations. They require political will, budget approval, legal courage, and when those pressures arrive, momentum fades. Instead, apologies are offered. They are sincere, they are emotional, they are free. The official at the podium says the words survivors have waited decades to hear. We are sorry. The room grows quiet. Some people cry. Others don't react at all. For many, the apology lands like a delayed echo, important, but hollow. Without something solid behind it, the activist stands to speak. Her voice is steady, but tired. An apology doesn't rebuild a home, she says. It doesn't return land. It doesn't erase a century of lost opportunity. She's not angry. She's precise. This is the tension of late recognition. When a nation remembers too late, justice becomes complicated. The dead are gone. Survivors are elderly. Odds are incomplete. Lawyers argue over statutes of limitation. Responsibility diffuses across generations until no one feels directly accountable. And yet, the harm remains measurable. Greenwood's descendants still live with reduced wealth, reduced access, reduced trust. Economists can trace the loss forward. Sociologists can chart the impact. But policy lags behind proof. Recognition arrives wearing the clothes of closure, even when nothing has been closed. The government official listens. He nods. He agrees in principle. But his answers circle back to feasibility, legal barriers, precedent, concerns about division. He frames restraint as responsibility. This is how institutions protect themselves while appearing to engage. Memorials are built, plaques are installed, school curricula slowly change. Greenwood becomes a symbol, a warning, a lesson, a chapter finally added to the textbook. But symbols do not transfer wealth, and lessons do not repair theft. The activist leaves the hearing knowing something important has happened and something essential has not. The story has been acknowledged. The pain has been named, but the cost has not been paid. This is what makes late remembrance so fragile. It risks becoming a substitute for justice instead of a path toward it. Across America, similar conversations are unfolding. Communities harmed by historical violence ask what acknowledgement should lead to. Whether memory without repair is progress or simply another way to move on without changing anything, and Greenwood stands at the center of that question. Because remembering Greenwood forces a reckoning just with what happened in 1921, but with what didn't happen afterward. The protection that ever came, the compensation that never arrived, the century of consequences that followed. So the question shifts again, not did America remember, but what does remembering require? Because if an apology cannot mend 100 years of loss, if recognition arrives without repair, then the final question of this story is unavoidable, and it does not belong only to Tulsa. In the end, Tulsa is not only Tulsa. Greenwood no longer exists as a place you can walk through, but it endures as a condition passed down through time. It lives in families who inherited caution instead of security, in communities shaped by losses that were never repaired, and in a silence that lasted longer than the violence itself. Tulsa is a mirror, not one held up to the past, but one angled toward the present. If another Greenwood were to emerge today, a community built through resilience, prosperity growing without permission, success challenging comfortable assumptions, what would truly be different? Would protection arrive before fear? Would institutions act before silence becomes policy? History does not repeat itself because it wants to. It repeats because we allow the conditions to remain. This story does not close with answers or resolution. It ends with a responsibility. Any Greenwood never had the chance to ask for. When the next moment comes, will we recognize it in time, or only remember it after the damage is already done?